In the middle of a bone-chilling snowstorm, a royal carriage stumbled along the frozen road. The wind howled, snow flew everywhere, and the air itself seemed determined to freeze the soul of anyone foolish enough to step outside. Inside the carriage sat a blonde beauty wrapped tightly in a thick coat. She was Canola F. Incana Charlemagne, Princess of Charlemagne. Her name already too long, not to mention the list of her life's problems. With her was an old man named Oscar. Maybe an aide, maybe an advisor, or maybe just her personal grumbler. His voice never stopped spinning in circles, laced with the pessimism of a man who's seen way too many bitter winters. According to him, this whole journey was a waste of energy. A marriage proposal for Princess Canola? Please. Everyone knew. Even if the world ended tomorrow, she'd never sit on the throne. Harsh words, sure, but behind them was a mix of worry. Or maybe just the complaints of a man whose knees hated -degree weather. So who exactly was he worrying about more? The princess or himself? On the other bench sat Angelina, an old lady with the spark of an oil lamp, always ready to flare up. She wasted no time blaming Oscar, pointing fingers like it was her job. Strangely, their bickering gave Canola a bit of free entertainment. At least she got a comedy show in the middle of a blizzard. Even though her lips were turning blue, she still had the brain space to think. A month ago, life was way more peaceful. Sketching, lounging around, believing that was enough to be happy. But everything flipped upside down when a letter arrived. Not a love letter. Nope. A command from her brother. Canola had to marry the crown prince of Tripoli. No picture, no options, no discussion. Just a political deal that screamed one thing. Her opinion didn't count. The trip dragged on. Angelina dug into Canola's love life, mentioning Hethion, that handsome guy who turned out to be a little unstable. Canola had been too quick to judge based on looks, falling for the pretty face that hid a shaky mind. Angelina even joked that just because someone's name sounded normal didn't mean their brain was. Exhibit A, Oscar. The mood only got tenser. If Oscar could call Angelina a sweet old witch, you could imagine how noisy that carriage ride got. Canola had already decided to dump Hethion anyway. He was just studying abroad here. And when he heard about this arranged marriage, instead of fighting for her, he used it as the perfect excuse to bow out. Was that selfishness or just cowardice? Who knows? All that mattered was Hethion had no guts to go against Canola's brother. Then disaster struck. The golden carriage, a farewell gift from her sister, broke down. One of the wheels shattered on the rough road. Canola thought about abandoning it, but Angelina flat out refused. No way were they showing up empty-handed. And when they checked, turns out the carriage wasn't just plated with gold. It was solid gold. Yeah, no sane person was leaving a walking treasure chest behind. Just as Canola was about to return to the carriage, riders appeared out of the storm. Ludek, another aide, quickly told her to get back inside. Her head spun with panic. Were they mountain bandits? Secret assassins sent to erase her? Or just opportunists who smelled gold from miles away? Angelina, ever sarcastic, muttered that if anyone still had the decency to greet strangers in this weather, maybe they weren't all bad. Soon, a man on a black horse rode forward. His skin was pale as snow, his hair whipped like the storm itself, and his green eyes gleamed like emeralds. The scene felt ripped straight out of a romance novel. Canola froze, utterly captivated, all of Angelina's warnings flying straight out the window. She almost believed she was looking at her fated groom. Angelina and Oscar, watching the princess stand there like she'd just been hit by Cupid's arrow, fell silent. Should they pity her, shake their heads, or just enjoy the free drama of a snowstorm love story kicking off right in front of them? Princess Canola was the definition of a hopeless romantic. One glance at the handsome white-haired man and her heart had already done 3 backflips. From that first moment, she couldn't wait to talk to her supposed fiancé, as if her whole life had been leading up to this scene. Angelina, who had seen enough drama to fill 10 romance novels, tried to reel Canola back in. Maybe don't get carried away just yet. One meeting doesn't mean destiny. But Canola was stubborn. Hadn't the prince already offered them a warm carriage, even going out of his way to clear out their trash? AKA, the broken golden carriage. Not to mention he rode through a blizzard just to greet them. If that wasn't proof of devotion, what was? She waited with a racing heart while the prince busied himself with repairs. The only words she got? A calm suggestion to go back inside because it was too cold out. Sure, that quiet, reserved charm was cute. But to Canola, it also screamed, maybe he's not even curious about me at all. The conversation slipped back into the past. Angelina reminded her of Lord Hethion. Yes, the same instant love story from before. First sight, swoon, full-blown drama. But in the end, the only decent thing about Hethion had been his face. Canola refused the comparison. This time was different. This wasn't some fling. This was her official future husband. Falling head over heels was perfectly reasonable. Angelina gave up. Every warning she voiced, Canola spun into a positive sign. The real question, why was Canola already head over heels while the so-called fiancé hadn't said a single word about feelings? Desperate for backup, Canola turned to Oscar. Surely her beauty was enough to make anyone fall in love at first sight? Without missing a beat, Oscar declared she was the most beautiful woman in the world, breathtaking in every way. Though unfortunately, only breathtaking to him and Angelina. Suddenly, knock, knock. The window shook. There he was, the white-haired prince himself. Canola nearly exploded with excitement, even insisting he come inside to talk. Pushy? Maybe. But that was Canola. The prince, however, politely declined. Rules were rules. All visitors to Tripol had to greet the king first. That meant neither he nor his knights could officially address her yet. In truth, they'd only come because they knew the Charlemagne carriage could never survive these winter mountains. Between the brutal cold and wild beasts, the trip was suicide without an escort. A knight called him Husa. Canola jumped at it. Was that his name? Nope. Just a title. As he prepared to leave, Canola tried one last angle. If these mountains were so dangerous, why risk himself instead of just sending knights? Calmly, the prince took her hand and said, "A man who can't protect his partner doesn't deserve to be called a warrior of Tripol." Her heart somersaulted again. She immediately looked at Oscar and Angelina like, "See? See? You heard that too, right?" For her, the evidence was undeniable. He was falling for her too. Oscar and Angelina exchanged a look. Déjà vu. Once again, Canola was writing her own script through very creative lenses. The journey pressed on. Canola replayed his words in her head. The road to becoming man and wife is still long. What did that mean exactly? Before she could overanalyze, Ludek knocked to announce they'd arrived in Tripol. Canola braced herself for flower petals, fanfare, maybe a dramatic welcome. Instead, dead silence. The cold air itself felt hostile. She immediately wondered if she'd already made a mistake. Oscar muttered that her reputation must have gotten here first. Apparently, she was known as a man-eater. Rude, but who could stop Oscar's mouth? Ludek urged them down. The prince led them straight toward the palace. Tripol was massive. Towering buildings, impossibly high ceilings, endless halls that made Charlemagne look tiny. Finally, they entered the main chamber. Waiting there was the king of Tripol himself, his presence sharp as a blade. His gaze cut like ice, his aura pressing down on everyone. Canola froze in shock, because this terrifying man was none other than her future father-in-law. The first meeting with the king of Tripol was supposed to be grand, epic, memorable. Instead, it was short, cold, and about as thrilling as stale bread. The king only counted how many people were in the party, clearly fewer than expected, either because no one dared join, or Tripol's reputation scared them off. Then, that was it. Canola couldn't accept that. No way. Was that really all? With her trademark habit of following every intrusive thought, she boldly stepped forward and introduced herself with her full royal name, long enough to fill an entire family tree. Canola F. Incana Charlemagne, the fourth princess of Charlemagne. To her, it was basic manners. Not introducing herself would just embarrass her kingdom. The Tripol knights actually held their breath, waiting for the king's reaction. The prince looked shocked, probably because Canola's bluntness was way too much by Tripol standards. To them, her courage sounded more like ignorance. Silence finally cracked. Before the prince could redirect, the king answered himself. He called himself Gragford, descendant of Tedrago. Getting a direct reply from the king should have been an honor. But Canola? She straight up asked if she could just call him father, since she'd be the daughter-in-law anyway. Absolutely unhinged. Of course he refused. His reason? She hadn't even set foot in the garden of Tedrago. The knights went stiff, but Canola just found it rude. She'd traveled all this way. Didn't she at least deserve better treatment? Self-centered? Maybe. But that was Canola. Inside, she fumed. How dare they decide her marriage without her voice? But on the other hand, there was no way she was leaving Charlemagne without at least one proper date with her gorgeous future husband. When it came to love, Canola was aggressive to the core. As if that wasn't enough, she piled on another request. Not only should she be treated as the princess of Charlemagne, she demanded to be honored as a guest of Tripol, too. Before her list of demands grew longer, a knight quickly cut in, asking permission to escort her to her quarters. The king ordered the prince to stay behind. Once in her room, Canola was told to wait for her personal attendant. Angelina immediately spoke up, practically glowing with admiration. Watching Canola speak up to the king of Tripol? That lit a fire in her. Oscar and Ludek chimed in too. In their eyes, Canola hadn't been wrong at all. Someone had to remind the king that even he couldn't treat foreign princesses like props, no matter how powerful he was. Canola, though pale, panicked. Had she ruined her first impression? Had she just gotten herself separated from her Prince Charming because of her bold mouth? Angelina saw it differently. If the prince was a real man, he should be captivated by Canola's courage. Looking for validation, Canola asked, "Did I look cool back there?" Of course, Oscar and Angelina said yes. Angelina even added she'd never seen Canola look that amazing before. Canola's confidence instantly shot back up. She proudly declared her bravery part of her irresistible charm. That high didn't last long. She finally took a good look at the room. Small, rustic, dull colors, dreary bedding, no decorations, not even space for her servants. Panic hit her. How was she supposed to explain to her loyal attendants that there wasn't a place for them to rest? A knock at the door cut through her thoughts. A woman entered, introducing herself as the personal servant assigned to the Princess of Charlemagne. Canola froze. She'd never imagined a servant this stunning. Tall, elegant, long black hair, and eyes glowing violet like polished amethyst. It looked like a brand new drama was about to begin. Canola almost forgot how to blink when her personal maid walked in. Tall, graceful, long flowing black hair, and violet eyes sparkling like amethyst gems. For a second, Canola wondered if Tripol had an unspoken law. You were either drop-dead gorgeous or terrifyingly fierce. No average category allowed. With her overactive imagination, Canola instantly nicknamed the maid Tibuchina. Tibuchina's sweet smile lit up the gloomy, rustic room like 1,000 candles. She offered to show Canola around the palace, until the prince appeared. His cold yet magnetic aura sucked all the oxygen out of the room in one swoop. The prince, the very man Canola's eyes had been glued to all this time, casually took over the tour himself. Tibuchina bowed and left. Canola blinked. Wait, so her maid wasn't required to be glued to her side? Weird rule. And so the palace tour began. Canola, who could never keep her curiosity in check, immediately obsessed over what she should call the man walking beside her. The prince explained the title, Husa, the name given to heirs of Tripol's throne. Canola listened seriously, then rejected it completely. Too formal. She wanted something more personal. After all, wasn't she going to be by his side from now on? Clingy level, maxed out. The prince looked stunned. His expression screamed, "Nobody's ever dared say that before." In Tripol, formality ruled all, but Canola barged right through it like she was picking out a nickname for her pet cat. And yet, behind his surprise, the prince gave her something real. His true name, Edel. In his eyes, Canola caught a flicker of loneliness. For a second, guilt pricked her chest. Maybe she'd pushed too far. But at the same time, jackpot. She got to call him by his name. Canola made a whole show of it. She stood tall and introduced herself with her full mountain of a name, topping it off by declaring herself his fiancée. Edel's reply was simple. He was merely a descendant of Tedrago. They shook hands. Canola clamped down on the handshake like superglue. Edel looked stiff, clearly not used to being grabbed that hard, but he didn't pull away. When talk shifted to the engagement letter, Canola admitted she'd suspected it was a fake. With how icy everyone in Tripol acted, it felt more like a war declaration than a wedding invite. Edel confirmed the letter was real, straight from the crown, but he offered no comfort, nothing to ease her nerves. His quiet pessimism made Canola's head spin even more. Meanwhile, Canola fiddled with the letter, trying to fold it neatly with one hand, because the other hand still had Edel trapped. Edel dryly suggested she finish folding first, then go back to holding his hand. Canola panicked. What if he ran off the second she let go? Edel deadpanned back. Why would he even run? Okay, maybe she was being a little much, but it wasn't her fault. Edel had held her hand first during their intro, and that tiny spark had flipped a switch inside her. Still, she knew one truth. She was the one who fell first, so of course she'd have to work harder. If Edel wasn't ready to return her feelings yet, then fine. She'd just put in the effort until he did. She even added that she wouldn't force him. If he didn't want her, she'd step back. Edel only reminded her that they'd known each other for literally one day and were already officially engaged. Maybe slow down a little? But slow down didn't exist in Canola's vocabulary. Instead, she doubled down. With full dramatic flair, she squeezed Edel's hand tight, bowed her head, and pressed a kiss to it like sealing a vow. Inside, her mind was already set. She was in love at first sight. She knew Edel wasn't there yet, but she'd fight with all her heart until he was. Blunt, clingy, and ridiculously over the top. That was Canola. And somehow that was exactly her charm. Days passed, but Canola's brain was stuck on one thing, her grand love confession to Edel. She'd poured her whole heart out, complete with dramatic hand-holding, and his reply had been a simple, "I see." That was it. Period. End of story. And honestly, it fit him perfectly. Cool, reserved, carved from marble handsome. Which meant Canola couldn't even be mad. Still, if Edel hadn't been that ridiculously good-looking, she probably would have given up 2 days ago and drowned her sorrows in cake. Angelina tried offering perspective. Compared to the suspicious glares of the Tripol court, like the Charlemagne delegation had come only to borrow money and skip town. I see was practically romantic. Canola picked up the engagement letter again. Plain, stiff, official, definitely legit. So not a fake. But why did Tripol seem to hate Charlemagne's guts? To make matters worse, Edel had left for a hunting trip the day after she arrived, only returning 3 days later. Talk about bad timing. Fall in love, then get ghosted. A soft knock pulled her from her sulk. Tibucina entered, her beauty glowing in the candlelight. She asked if Canola was all right. She'd been locked in her room for days, and Tibucina feared she might be ill. Logically, this should have made Canola happy. But pride got in the way. Instead of blushing with gratitude, she snapped back, asking why Tibucina had only shown up now. Wasn't she supposed to be helping her settle in? Tibucina's answer surprised her. Edel didn't really like Tibucina visiting too often. That's why she held back. But since Canola welcomed her, she was glad. And just like that, Canola realized, oh, Tibucina wasn't actually her maid. Confusion deepened. How did Tripol's social system even work? Tibucina explained. She wasn't a servant assigned to wait on Canola, but someone meant to help her adapt. She wasn't a noble either. In Tripol, nobles were called radins, kin of the king, diras. The warriors who served the diras and radins were grassas. Tibucina herself worked for the temple. Angelina watched Canola's face twist with confusion. Even she had to admit the whole Tripol system was baffling. She'd have to start learning too, just to keep up. Tibucina reassured them both. Canola would get used to it, and she'd personally teach her every day. "So you don't get lost," she said with a smile. Canola jumped at the idea. Forget lessons today. What she really needed was healing, like a walk around the palace. If she stayed locked up any longer, she'd start growing mushrooms. Tibucina agreed, smiling softly. Meanwhile, far away, Edel's hunting party finally returned. This year's hunt had taken longer. The quota was double last year's, but they succeeded. As they celebrated, they remembered darker times when a plague nearly wiped them out. If not for Edel, Husa, discovering the treatment, they might not have survived. The mood turned playful when one warrior teased Edel. Surely he was eager to get home because his fiancée, Canola, had already confessed her love. Edel's reply was colder than Tripol's snow. That means nothing. The warriors froze in shock. Thank heavens Canola wasn't there. Her heart would have shattered like thin ice. Then Edel added that he knew the temple had sent Tibucina to accompany Canola, and competent in this case meant skilled enough to make Canola leave Tripol sooner. The mystery deepened, but behind his frosty mask, Edel couldn't lie to himself. From the start, Canola had dazzled him, her golden curls, her smile bright as spring sunlight. Yet her eyes carried the same icy winter as his homeland. He knew her confidence was born of ignorance, and that was exactly what made him unable to look away. Still, to him, none of it mattered. The temple had already decided. Diraz would not defy their will. The arranged marriage would eventually be canceled. And so Edel sealed his feelings shut, as though they'd never existed. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Tibucina could hardly believe it when she found out Canola had come to Tripol without knowing so much as her fiancé's face or name. To her, it sounded like a forced tragedy. One person carrying the burden, while the other might not even realize there was a burden. Canola, in her innocence, thought that's just how royal marriages always worked. Tibucina nearly smacked her own forehead. How could anyone accept fate so easily? In her view, living a life you never chose only led to one thing: bitterness. But Canola thought differently. To her, life was already full of blessings. Why waste energy on resentment? She was so positive that if there were a contest for ambassador of staying happy in miserable situations, Canola would have won gold on the spot. As they walked through the palace together, one thing stuck out. Everything looked gloomy. Bare stone walls, no royal portraits, no fancy decor, not even a decent selfie corner. Only the reception hall had a bit of carved detail. The rest? Uniform, cold, painfully practical. Tibucina explained that the bleak look was intentional. Tripol valued function over beauty. In her eyes, it was far more humble than Charlemagne. Ironically, it was this very plainness that made Canola feel Tripol had its own odd kind of charm. Then they reached a spot so gray that Canola thought it was a cemetery. Nope, just the palace's back garden, long abandoned. Tibucina told its story calmly. The gardener had given up, beaten by the frozen, stubborn soil that refused warmth. Canola realized she hadn't seen a single tree, let alone flowers, since her arrival. Cold air was one thing, but did the land itself have to be this heartless? Out of nowhere, Tibucina turned to her and spoke bluntly. Canola was too beautiful and too warm-hearted for a place like Tripol. She should go somewhere worthy of her, where love would welcome her. Tripol was full of cold, closed-off people who hated outsiders. If she wanted, that alone could be her ticket to cancel the engagement. Canola was stunned, but instead of crumbling, she corrected Tibucina. Sure, she wouldn't deny she was beautiful. Facts are facts. But Tibucina had misunderstood. She wasn't naturally warm-hearted. Her friendliness and charm were a deliberate effort, not some divine gift. And while yes, she was disappointed by Tripol's chilly welcome, she wasn't shocked. If coldness toward foreigners was the norm here, then she would just work harder to understand it. Tibucina admitted she liked Canola, and that's exactly why she didn't want to see the girl's light dim. Canola only smiled softly, insisting people don't change that easily. She might live this way until the end of her life. She thanked Tibucina for her concern, but refused to give up. Tibucina clenched her fist, as if silently swearing, "Just wait and see." She was convinced Canola would suffer under the weight of this icy nation. But Canola fired back with energy. She couldn't quit, because she'd already fallen for Edel at first sight. She even had a whole speech prepared about how she was going to make Edel fall in love with her too. To her, true love only grew stronger when tested. The reply left Tibucina gaping. How could anyone be this optimistic? Canola's bright smile, paired with her light-hearted words, felt like a gentle slap against every warning Tibucina had given. The longer she looked at her, the clearer it was. This girl was dazzling, and completely out of place in Tripol. When Tibucina called her Princess Canola, something in the tone felt heavy. The truth followed. Tripol's heir wasn't just a ruler, but also the nation's strongest warrior. Naturally, their partner had to meet the same standard. Strong body, wise mind, pure heart. And according to the temple, a foreigner could almost never meet those criteria. Break that rule, and the gods would punish Tripol, stripping away their blessings. Only then did Tibucina reveal her true self, the high priestess of the temple, servant of the god of all things, bearer of Tripol's prayers. Her duty now was to judge Canola's worth, to decide if the marriage with Edel could be blessed or not. With solemn eyes, she asked Canola to prove herself worthy to step into Tedrago's sacred garden. Ludek, Canola's personal guard, was at the end of his rope. He actually marched straight up to Diraz, suicidal move, honestly, and complained flat out. His voice was steady, but the irritation slipped through. The way Tripol treated them was over the top, cold and completely uncalled for. His question landed sharp. Was Diraz just turning a blind eye? Or were Tripol's servants really that cruel? Diraz didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked to Husa, Edel, for his opinion. Edel's reply was as short as ever. Nothing was wrong. With that said, Diraz added that Tripol had treated Charlemagne with the utmost respect. The words dripped with irony, more like a half-baked excuse than a real answer. Before Ludek could argue, Diraz switched the topic to something even harsher: Charlemagne's dowry. According to him, Tripol received less than half of what was promised. Because of that, it was up to Tripol whether the marriage would even continue. The atmosphere turned so tense it felt like the air itself was trembling. When Ludek finally left, only Diraz and Edel remained. Calm as ever, Edel said the dowry Canola brought was already enough to cover half their winter expenses. Wouldn't it be better to just be honest with her? Diraz smirked. Not kindly, but with that sharp, mocking edge. Should he really tell her that her own brother cut the dowry short just to save money? Even if she had brought double, the temple still wouldn't approve. In his eyes, the temple's word would decide everything, not piles of gold. Edel already knew where this was heading. Tibucina would pressure Canola until she gave up on her own, because the temple would never allow a foreigner to sit beside Tripol's heir. Still, Diraz admitted that a barren land sometimes had to be practical. Maybe they'd keep the proposal alive, but for survival, not love. Outside, Ludek was waiting for Edel, risking being called insolent. I knew Edel's loyal guard immediately moved to block him, but Edel allowed it, giving Ludek a short window. Ludek didn't waste time. Was the dowry really part of the official deal? Edel confirmed. Charlemagne had proposed the amount themselves. Tripol merely agreed. In exchange, they received Princess Canola. Then Edel flipped it. Wasn't Canola basically being discarded by her own kingdom? Ludek hesitated, then admitted the bitter truth. But he swore Canola wasn't a bad person. On the contrary, everyone in Charlemagne admired her. Edel didn't deny it. He'd seen that side of her himself. Their talk ended with mutual respect, and Ludek stepped back. Ainu urged Edel to rest after the long hunt, but Edel's thoughts drifted elsewhere. How had Canola reacted when Tibucina revealed her true identity? Ainu's answer was flat. Canola asked Tibucina to go easy on her, like she was bargaining for a sale, not facing a life trial. Edel gave a faint smile. No wonder everyone was drawn to her. Not long after, Ludek broke the news to Canola. Their engagement letter meant nothing. Her own family had played her. Canola rejected that instantly. She even dragged Oscar over to help her shut down the nonsense. She had finally gotten into study mode, and now she was being interrupted by cheap gossip? Absolutely not. She fumed, frustrated that even her closest people weren't supporting her. Then, thud. Angelina was just about to say something to Canola, but it was already too late. Canola had collided head-on with Edel. The prince's voice was gentle as he asked if she was all right. Panic seized her. Oh no, had he heard everything? Blushing furiously, she blurted out that her life was over. Edel just stared, confused. To him, her face looked more like a ripe strawberry than a tragedy. When Edel asked what she meant, Canola scrambled to deflect. She teased that he usually slept right after hunting, so she didn't expect to see him at all. Edel smiled and said he'd rather hear about her time in Tripoli. Canola admitted honestly, at first it was awful, but thanks to Tibucina, things got better. Edel asked if she knew Tibucina had been sent to evaluate her. Canola nodded, proudly showing off a library book Tibucina had helped her borrow. Edel asked for the title, and Canola revealed it with full innocence. Let's learn the history of Tripol with pictures. From behind, Oscar nearly whispered something snarky. The book was literally all pictures, but Canola slapped a hand over his mouth before he could start trouble. Edel then offered to pick out a better book for her, to make up for neglecting her before. To Canola, it sounded exactly like a library date. She lit up, beaming so hard she could barely contain it. Angelina and Oscar exchanged knowing looks, silently groaning, "That's not what he meant." But it was pointless. They knew by now how hopelessly romantic Canola was. Overjoyed, Canola suggested they do the date in Edel's style. Ainu glanced at Edel, ready to step in before this delusion went too far. But Ludek quickly explained. Canola wasn't dangerous, just head over heels for Edel. Once she understood the real situation, she'd back down on her own. In his eyes, the engagement was already as good as broken. But Ainu, catching the subtle shift in Edel's expression, wasn't so sure. Canola and Edel finally arrived at the library. Canola peeked inside and almost tripped on her own surprise. She had expected a grand, majestic building full of towering shelves and endless rows of books. Because honestly, why else would the library staff be so uptight about her and Edel hanging out together? But nope. The place was tiny. Cozy, yes, but way smaller than she imagined. Turns out the people of Tripol hadn't really been around long enough to build a massive history, let alone a massive library. So, fewer people, fewer years, fewer books. Edel, meanwhile, was starting to realize something very obvious. Canola had basically arrived in Tripol without knowing anything about Tripol. Canola immediately panicked, scrambling to defend herself. It wasn't her fault. Nobody in Charlemagne knew about Tripol, so of course there weren't any books about it there. Edel hadn't meant to criticize, just stating the obvious that it was normal she didn't know much. But Canola, being Canola, marched straight up to him while he was browsing the shelves, stared at him like a curious puppy, and practically begged him to teach her. Her eyes sparkled as she explained she'd be living here now, so she wanted to know everything about the place. Oh, And about Edel, too. Of course. She poked his arm playfully to make sure he got the hint. Her outspoken, cheerful personality often left Edel caught off guard, probably because he had never met a girl like Canola before. So, Edel gave in and pulled out a book. Their first lesson, The History of Tripol. Apparently, the Tripolians came from the northern plains of Edessa. Back then, they were just small nomadic tribes, scattered everywhere, hardly even a country. Edel showed her a mountain range on the map, the Grantonia Mountains, aka the northern part of the Winter Mountains. That's where Tripol was. No clear mark on the map, but right there, hidden in the middle of the peaks. Canola leaned in, wide-eyed, and asked how on earth these people went from open plains all the way up into those mountains. Edel explained they had been driven out during Edessa's War of Conquest. That shocked Canola. The Tripolians had been chased into the mountains, but eventually the pursuit stopped, and that's when they settled there for good. As Edel explained, he didn't look particularly happy. Whether because his face rarely showed emotion or because the story itself was pretty heavy, Canola couldn't tell. He continued, Long ago, their monarch hunted regularly to feed the people, a tradition still alive today. They only hunted enough to survive the winter, because the gods allowed no more than that. Canola's heart softened a little. Maybe that was why Tripol wasn't exactly welcoming to outsiders. Suddenly, thunk. Edel shut the book, his tone sharpened. The war may be long gone, but anything involving outsiders always ended in disaster. He even showed her a picture of the temple in the Winter Mountains, which people believed was proof from the gods that outlanders were dangerous. And everyone agreed on that. But Canola, of course, had her own thoughts. She concluded the Tripolians had basically isolated themselves. Edel froze, caught off guard. And then Canola went further. What if this whole grand belief about outsiders was actually what caused starvation and suffering for their own people? Edel calmly put the book back and replied that it was just an assumption. In his view, the belief was what had allowed them to survive here. They locked eyes. Canola grinned, thanking him with her usual oversized smile. Edel, again, had no idea what to do with her reactions. But as she reflected, she noticed. Edel had told her plenty about Tripol, but not a word about himself. Edel thought there was nothing special to say. Canola, of course, teased him. Maybe it wasn't that he had nothing to share. Maybe he just didn't want to. She pressed her finger to her lips with a playful smirk, and Edel was left speechless. Canola jumped to her feet, admitting maybe she was just impatient. Maybe their pace was different. She was fiery, after all. But she was more than willing to tell Edel everything about herself. He could ask her anything. At first, Edel didn't want to, but then he thought of one thing. Just one. He asked why she had been exiled from Charlemagne. Boom. Instant mood change. Canola froze. Edel didn't push. But then, just like that, Canola's cheeks turned bright pink, and she blurted out that she felt like she'd just fallen in love with him all over again. Because to her, the question meant Edel really wanted to know about her. So, she confessed. The reason was simple. She was the easiest target. She was the farthest from the throne in the line of succession, basically prey for her siblings. Whether she came to Tripol or not, she would have been forced out anyway. So, in her words, Canola ran away. She fled to survive. She smiled faintly at the end, relieved but with a trace of sadness. She thought about it more. If not for her marriage, her sister might have claimed everything for herself, and her brother probably would have shipped her off here under the pretense of for her own good. Yet, Canola still spun it into something positive. Maybe her siblings had even seen Edel's portrait and thought she'd like him. She walked closer to Edel, flashing that trademark grin, and said they weren't so different after all. Tripol was a nation of people who had escaped to survive, just like her. Edel blinked in surprise again. He was starting to realize Canola was utterly unpredictable. She could turn every heavy truth into something that sparkled. Before he could even finish processing that thought, Canola hit him with a new request. She squinted at him playfully and asked if he'd be her first model for a portrait she wanted to draw in Tripol. Tibucina dropped by Canola's place, only to find her not home. Ludek, ever the informant, casually mentioned that Canola was off with Husa. Tibucina's face instantly fell. She turned to leave, disappointment written all over her, when, bam! She bumped straight into Canola, who had just returned. Canola froze like a deer in headlights. Panic, worry, and a dash of guilt painted across her face. Was Tibucina here to test her already? She hadn't even had time to prepare. But here's the kicker. Tibucina was just as confused. The test Canola was stressing over wasn't even the same test Tibucina had in mind. Misunderstanding level, maximum. Still, Canola remembered when Tibucina had basically declared war by demanding she prove herself worthy of stepping foot in the Garden of Tedrago. So in her mind, Tibucina showing up could only mean trouble. Which, hilariously enough, Tibucina confirmed. Yet, Tibucina also remembered her own promise to help Canola prepare. And the second Canola pulled out the big guns, teary eyes, pout, dramatic sobs, and even questioning if promises in Tripol meant nothing. Well, Tibucina had no choice but to keep her word. It was a reminder, too. If the temple had to authorize a royal marriage, then maybe divine right trumped the king himself. Heavy stuff. The two settled down over tea, and Canola nervously asked if it was okay for Tibucina to openly help her. Maybe if they kept it low-key, it wouldn't be a big deal. Tibucina only smiled serenely and said she had to stay close if she wanted to catch Canola's mistakes. And the way she said it, so calm, so affectionate, made Canola completely melt instead of getting upset. Canola's energy was infectious, and even Tibucina found her fun. If Tibucina could see it, why hadn't Edel noticed yet? Tibucina looked away, speaking casually but bluntly. She actually hoped Edel never did. Canola almost fell out of her chair at that curse. But Tibucina explained, if Edel ever realized how fun Canola was, he'd want to spend every waking moment with her, and then Canola would have no time left for Tibucina. Canola, with her usual confidence, fired back. That was a completely different matter. She'd always make time for beautiful ladies like Tibucina. Cue Tibucina turning away quickly, clearly flustered. Tripolians just weren't built for this level of positivity and bluntness. So Tibucina got back on track. Since Canola was making time for her now, she'd give her some sample test questions. But Canola, beaming, cheerful, zero negative vibes, immediately jumped to the conclusion that Tibucina was plotting to sabotage her studies so she'd fail. Then her brain took another detour. Wait a second. If there were sample questions, that meant other Outlanders had tried entering the Garden of Tedrago before. Could it be? Edel had another fiancé once? Tibucina nearly choked on her tea. Absolutely not. That was long before Canola ever set foot in Tripol. The only reason she was sharing these questions was in the faint, desperate hope that Canola would give up and go home. The exhaustion on Tibucina's face said it all. But if there's one thing everyone knows about Canola, it's that giving up is not in her vocabulary. She bounces back, no matter what. Tibucina's patience was fraying. She argued that Canola's stubbornness came from not yet facing real Tripolian hostility, because ever since her arrival, she'd been tucked safely inside the palace. Once she faced how cold and unwelcoming people could be, surely she'd change her mind. Any normal person might shrink at that. But Canola? She grinned and pointed out that Tibucina herself had never been hostile toward her. Which was true. Tibucina was just avoiding adding more fuel to the fire. Still, who even thought like that? Only Canola. Then, with a dramatic smack on the table, Canola challenged Tibucina to show her that hostility. Their eyes locked, tension rising, the air thick enough to cut. But Tibucina's mind wandered, flashing back to the day she received her divine assignment. It had been her test from the gods, her one chance to prove she was worthy of becoming the next high priestess, the most honored position of all, serving the supreme god himself. The day she broke the curse of the Outlanders would be the day a new high priestess was born. She couldn't afford to fail. She only snapped back to reality when Canola tapped her shoulder, breaking the silence. So, fine. If Canola wanted to face Tripolian hostility, Tibucina would start with the worst of the worst. The 5 warriors of Husa. No one in Tripol was more fiercely guarded than them. And just like that, the stage was set. There were 5 soldiers closest to the monarch, sworn protectors known as the Grassas. They had been through thick and thin with him, even back when he was just Husa, and not once had they ever betrayed their monarch. Loyal, sharp, and terrifyingly disciplined, they were basically the muscle behind the crown. One evening at the training center, the soldiers' usual hangout, Ainu, the brown-haired warrior who was practically glued to Husa's side, walked in late. Big mistake. Immediately, the others pounced. Rome, with his bronze-colored medium-length hair, and Tugol, rocking a short bronze cut, grilled him about why he was arriving this late. Ainu, ever patient, explained that Husa had only just gone to bed. Q Radak, the sharp-tongued, blue-haired soldier, smirking and suggesting maybe Husa had been chatting with an outlander longer than expected. Rome's ears perked right up. Ah, he must mean that night, Ludek. But Ainu waved it off, saying Ludek barely got 5 minutes. So then Ulan, the bun-haired, brown-haired soldier, finally chimed in. If not Ludek, then who on earth was Husa talking to so late at night? Ainu's answer dropped like a stone in a still pond. Husa had been meeting his fiancée. Ulan practically choked. Rome, meanwhile, went straight into rage mode. How dare Husa stay up late when the last hunt had drained him? And of course, who else was there to blame but Ainu? Ainu defended himself. He was only assigned to watch Husa's back, not block what came from the front. Rome snapped. What was his mouth for then? Decoration? But the truth was, Ainu had already warned Husa. Radak, ever the analyst, pointed out that Husa had never once delayed rest after a hunt. His stamina was on another level compared to the soldiers, but even he needed recovery. Tomorrow the schedule went back to normal, and instead of a full day's rest, now he'd only get half. Radak squinted suspiciously. What was so important that Husa had to meet his fiancée after such an exhausting hunt? Ainu explained the two had gone to the library. Yes, the library, to pick out books together. Radak rolled his eyes. Was Husa really that into her? Ainu shrugged. He hadn't heard it directly, but from the way things looked, it was obvious. Husa had fallen for the princess. Ulan tried to bring everyone back to reality. The princess was an outlander. There was no way Husa, of all people, would accept an outlander. Rome and Tugol muttered about the temple's policies. Unchangeable, eternal. Maybe the temple was even using the outlander as bait to trip Husa up. But Ainu insisted the others needed to see how Husa treated the princess. And as if on cue, he announced the princess was on her way right now to meet them. Sure enough, Tibucina appeared with the princess in tow. Tibucina was calm as ever, but Canola? She clung to Tibucina's arm like a child clutching a teddy bear, nervous eyes darting around. Radak bristled immediately. No random person was allowed into the training center. Tibucina could come in. She was special. But the outlander? Absolutely not. His icy glare practically froze Canola in place. Tibucina only smiled, adjusting her hold on Canola. True, outlanders weren't allowed in, but a royal fiancé was an exception. Since the soldiers hadn't yet been formally introduced, she'd escorted Canola here. So, she asked, politely but firmly, that they show their respects. Canola, meanwhile, was in her own little world. She'd heard Tripolians were tall, but seeing these men up close, they looked more like bears than humans. And of course, being Canola, her mouth moved faster than her brain. She pointed out that Ulan's button looked like it was about to pop off, and wow, weren't all these soldiers ridiculously muscular? Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that could kill. Quickly, Canola added a disclaimer. It was a compliment. No offense intended. Back in Charlemagne, it was totally normal to comment on someone's physique. Besides, Edel was the only man for her, so no one needed to get their feathers ruffled. Tibucina coughed delicately, a subtle, "Please stop talking now" signal. Ulan stepped forward, unimpressed, and asked if this was supposed to be the final stop on Canola's palace tour. Tibucina had already said this was for formal greetings, not sightseeing, but Ulan clearly didn't buy it. Why else would Canola bother coming here? Bright-eyed and grinning, Canola explained it was simple. They were Edel's closest soldiers. Of course she'd be seeing them often. The soldiers froze. She just called him Edel, by name. Canola remembered Edel once mentioning no one called him that, but hey, there was no actual law against it, just some unspoken rule. With hands on hips, she defended herself boldly. Edel had introduced himself with that name, so obviously she was allowed to use it. Case closed. Then she turned to Tibucina like a kid needing backup. "See? I do know my manners." Tibucina nodded, though her face screamed, not entirely convinced. One soldier immediately shot back. If she really knew her manners, why was she speaking so casually to the top priestess? Did she even know who Tibucina was? Canola, never one to back down, answered just as loudly. Sure, she knew. Tibucina had been sent by the temple to get rid of her. But Tibucina was also her only friend here, the only one who actually took care of her. Ulan nearly lost it at hearing Canola call Tibucina her friend. Radak quickly restrained him and stepped in to take control. Calm but sharp, he introduced himself formally, then named the others one by one. Ulan, Ainu, Rome, and Tugal. Each soldier bowed as their name was spoken. Finally, it was Canola's turn. She opened her mouth to introduce herself, but Radak shut her down cold. They weren't interested in her name, didn't need to know it, and certainly weren't going to use it. She should just leave. The atmosphere? Frosty. The tension? Sky high. And Canola? Probably still thinking about Ulan's button. The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone stood blinking at the ice-cold remark, too stunned to react. Everyone except Canola. She wasn't about to budge. After all, she'd already been trying to be polite. And besides, as the Lord's fiancée, her rank technically sat above theirs. That little reminder stabbed Radak straight in the gut. Still, Canola carried herself with poise, clarifying in her own way that they simply weren't familiar with one another yet. It was natural that there would be a distance. Of course, Radak, forever champion of bad interpretations, twisted it into thinking she wanted to be treated as though she was leagues above them. What she had really meant was far simpler. She just wanted everyone to get to know each other like normal human beings. And then came the kicker. Of all people, Radak was the absolute last one who should be clinging to grudges. Honestly, who stayed that twisted? Rome and Tugal practically sank into their boots, mortified at the way Canola had roasted Radak right in front of them. Canola, meanwhile, floated past him as if nothing had happened, pointing toward a corner and suggesting the group settle there for a proper chat. She even invited Tibucina along. Radak made an effort to intervene, but Tibucina accepted with a serene, radiant smile that immediately sealed the moment. 4 soldiers blushed like schoolboys, and Radak looked like a man checkmated in his own game. So they sat, and Rome began telling stories about Husa. Canola sparkled with enthusiasm, clearly delighted. Rome, warming to her, revealed that Husa, contrary to appearances, was incredibly strong. He was getting carried away, but Radak's trademark cough signaled him to quit being so friendly. That, of course, backfired. Canola snapped back with a title so long it could have been its own speech. Mr. Look Like He Wouldn't Hold a Grudge but is actually a complete maniac. She said the whole thing, every word. Radak nearly combusted on the spot, demanding why he had to be saddled with such a bizarre label. But Canola's reasoning was bulletproof. He'd forbidden her to use his name, and with 5 soldiers in the room, calling him soldier wasn't exactly precise. So she chose the most fitting title possible. Humiliated, Radak shot to his feet, fists clenched. Canola, still smiling sweetly, made it all look like harmless banter. Rome completely lost control, laughing until tears ran down his face. Tugel was floored. This was the first time he'd ever seen Radak unable to fire back. Canola joined in the laughter, urging everyone to savor the rare sight while it lasted. Rome picked up where he had left off about Husa, while Radak sank back into his seat, sighing in defeat. As he listened, realization dawned. Among Tripolians, boasting about Husa was old news, hardly worth repeating. But to an outsider, yes, even if that outsider was the so-called princess, every little detail glittered like treasure. She was, in fact, the perfect audience to boast to. It hit him then that Ainu had been right earlier. Husa really had fallen for her. Naturally, Radak couldn't let the moment breathe. He stood again, switching back into party pooper mode, and declared it was time for the princess to leave since training was about to begin. Canola wasn't buying it. Tibucina herself had said there was no training that day. So was Radak implying the priestess had lied? And this time she delivered the challenge with impeccable formal tone. That formality made Radak squirm. Since they'd already become acquainted, he tried to push for less stiffness. But Canola, with a graceful gesture of her hand, politely refused. If she couldn't even address him by name, then the distance between them was undeniable. And with such a distance, how could she ever speak casually with him? Rome, laughing so hard he was nearly in tears again, backed her up completely. Radak mentally stamped Rome's forehead with a big red enemy. Canola was ready to continue her lively chat when a messenger from the temple appeared, leaning in to whisper urgently to Tibucina. The priestess was requested to return immediately. Tibucina refused, explaining that she was still accompanying the princess. That alone was enough to fire Radak back up. Rules didn't change overnight. A few hours of chatting did not give an outsider the privilege of closeness with Tibucina. What exactly was the priestess playing at? Tibucina's calm eyes slid toward him, silently questioning his meaning. Radak pressed harder, suspicious of her motives. She should have been assessing the princess objectively, not letting personal feelings sway her. Tibucina smiled at that, admitting the thought had crossed her mind, but insisting she still viewed Canola with perfect objectivity. Radak's irritation didn't fade. He warned that if Tibucina was using the princess as a way to frame Husa, he wouldn't stand by idly. The priestess's smile vanished, replaced with icy clarity. The temple's goal, she explained, had always been the prosperity of Tripol, guided by the blood of its monarch. There was no reason for Temple and Tedrago to ever be at odds. Ainu, watching tension spike, nudged Radak to stop. But Tibucina caught the gesture instantly, demanding that Ainu confirm her statement. Cornered, Ainu admitted she was right. There was no reason to fight. From her seat apart from the group, Canola suddenly raised her hand high like an eager student, requesting Tibucina's attention. Without hesitation, Tibucina glided past Radak and Ainu to join her. Left behind, Ainu leaned close to Radak, quietly reminding him that provoking the priestess was a losing battle. Radak knew it, but the thought still burned in his chest. After all, none of this would have even been possible without Husa's rise. Ainu's steady hand landed on his shoulder, reassuring him. Nobody had forgotten that. Not a single one of them.